Good morning and welcome to the opening session of day 3. It's nice to see P. Oh, in this one, okay. Welcome to the opening session of day 3, See Between the Lines, Stories from Goa. Before we begin, just a few things to keep in mind. Please fill up the seats in the front so people joining us later can easily be accommodated at the back. Please put your phones on silent mode. The loser on the right, tea and coffee snacks are available in the cafeteria, and the smoking area is on your left. We'll be taking questions at the end. Please wait for the mic to be handed over to you before asking your question. Today's panel will explore the rich literary history of Goa in this conversation on writings from the state, its oral literatures, family stories, local legends, and myths, and what it means to be Goan. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. Heta Pandit is an independent researcher, activist, and author of 11 books on Goan heritage, its art, and culture. She's a Homi Bhabha Fellow and co founder of Goa Heritage Action Group. Some of her books are Houses of Goa, Hidden Hands, Master Builders of Goa, Grinding Stories, Songs from Goa, and her recent work is Stories from Goen Houses. Michelle Bambawale spent her childhood in a Goan Catholic family in Pune, India. Since then, she has lived in 3 places in India and 3 countries around the world, raising her own nomadic family. Over the years, she has contributed to numerous publications in India and the UAE. During COVID-19 pandemic, Michelle moved to her ancestral home in Seolim in North Goa, which inspired her debut book, Becoming Goan. It is a contemporary coming home story published by Penguin Random House in December 2023 and describes the road to her roots in her provocative, tongue-in-cheek style. Our moderator for the session is Harihara SS. Hari is the communications and outreach consultant at the Heritage Network with historian Heta Pandit and also the events and community facilitator at Champaka Books New Store in Goa. His role in the past as artist manager, event producer, social entrepreneur have all been endeavors in community building around heritage, history, arts, and culture. Over to you, Hari.
Hi, good morning. Thank you everyone for coming this Sunday morning. And as someone who grew up in Bangalore, I'm really excited to be asking 2 authors from Goa questions. So I really hope you all enjoy this session. And I'm actually going to start off with 2 quotes from both their books to set context for our talk today. In Hita's book, Stories from Goen Houses, our fellow friend Vivek Menezes writes, he quotes Graham Greene, who was dispatched from the London office of the Sunday Times during Goa's liberation from Portugal's dictator Antonio Salazar. In his March 1964 cover story entitled Goa the Unique, Greene said that most houses, however small, are constructed of laterite blocks with brown tiles of great beauty. They were built by Goans, not by Portuguese, for the Portuguese lived only in the towns. Often by Goans in exile, in Aden, or in Africa, who hope to return one day, for the far-ranging Goan has loyalty to his village you seldom find elsewhere. It seemed the first thing one Goan asked another, not in what city he worked, but what village he came. And that's from Heta's foreword. And Michelle also in her book, in a chapter called What's So Special About Goans Anyway, she lists a lot of things that makes Goans really special. But she also quotes again, saying, however, as soon as 2 Goans meet, no matter where on the planet, the first question is, which village are you from, followed by which Wado. I'm using these 2 quotes to set a lot of emphasis on how important the village is as a Goan's identity. And both their books are also important because they came right after the pandemic. And like a lot of important events in Goa's history, the pandemic was really, really important. And their books came out then. It's as important as when Adil Shah was overthrown, was as important as when the Portuguese were overthrown, because the pandemic brought in, I think, the biggest influx of people into Goa. And their books were set around the same time, and it deals a lot with the identity of Goan villagers at the same time. So yeah, I'd like to start with why you all wrote the book then, and yeah, what are your books about?
Thanks, Hari, and thanks everyone here. So, like Hari said, the pandemic was a sort of turning point or pivot in Goa where a lot of people moved into Goa, including me. And I think it made me look at issues of identity and culture. Also, I think Goa was changing so fast in terms of the migration of people into Goa. And I focused specifically on Seoli, which is a village where I inherited a house. So I think it changed so fast, and just to process what was happening, I had to write it down. And I think the development is like sort of overwhelming in terms of the unplanned development. And I think that was the pivot of writing the book.
And you, Heta?
But a lot of the things, thank you. A lot of the songs that I've collected, this is in 2 volumes. A lot of the songs that I'd collected are sung, composed by the women themselves, and they sing it at the grinding stone. Some of these women were married off at the age of 8 or 9. Difficult for us to fathom now in this day and age, but that's how it was in those days. And some of them were not even allowed to go home to their maternal homes, to their parents' house. In fact, Subhadra Ai, one of the singers who's now in her 80s, she said, I could see my mother's house across the river, but every time I said to my mother-in-law that I want to go home, and she's a child of 8 or 9, she was told that, oh no, the river's flooded, somebody has to come from your mother's house to collect you, there's no male member to take you across, and stuff like that. So this is the kind of emotion that's been filtered into these songs.
And your new book, Stories from Goen Houses?
New book, Stories from Goen Houses. This was brought out in my mother's centenary in 2022. And these are stories from 21 Goen houses. And the interesting thing is, when I first came to Goa in 1995, this book would not have been possible, because the house owners were not really open to sharing their stories at that time, especially the Hindu homes, the wealthier family owned houses, large families. Daughters-in-law would get into the kitchens when I entered, and only the men would meet me and make me sit outside, either in the balcony or the veranda, and have like totally, vague conversations, nothing substantial. So from that we've come a long way.
Thank you. Your book is called Becoming Goan, and you actually have an entire chapter called What Makes Us Goan. Could you tell us a little more about that? And do you feel like you've become Goan after coming back?
I think, there are different aspects to, I think, anyone and anything and identity. And like Heta said, the whole idea of Goa, the moment you say Goa, even yesterday when we spoke, everybody sort of smiles at you, and they have some story, and it is a special place. So I was trying to understand what it was, and I think as an expat Goan, I had sort of some idea, because you live in a community. But I think when you live in Goa in a village, it's a different experience, because the connection to the land, the connection to the seasons, the connection to your trees, the paddy, the coconut, which is very different. So I think I learned a lot very quickly. I had to figure out how to manage my mango trees, my coconut trees, my house, the tiles on my roof, and things which, if you live in a city, you're not really familiar with. So I think I kept thinking about, what is this? Because everybody has this dream of having a house in Goa and these houses, and I have to go back to your point about Portuguese houses. Right now, they are sold a lot as being Portuguese houses. So these Goan houses and how they relate to your identity and what it means to be Goan and the connection to the land. So I think I sort of made up my own criteria, because, you can't sort of make any identity one. It is, it evolves and different people interpret it differently. So yes, definitely much closer. But I'm working my way down my list. So I'm definitely becoming more Goan.
Thank you. And you have 21 houses listed across these. Are there any common threads to how they define their Goan identity?
Actually, what we did was with the Anita Singh's guidance, we grouped the houses. So we later, after interviewing these families, realized that they fell into certain groups, like there were freedom fighter families, there were families that had grown in business, there were families that had migrated during the forced conversions, come to Karnataka, to Ankola and Sirsi, with their carpenters, masons, painters, and so on, and who then came back to Goa, and how they re-established themselves and so on. So there are, that's how we group them, but quite by accident. We didn't plan when we put them together. It was very interesting that once we started out with the Gaunekar house, which was the first house I had ever seen, 1983. Gaunekar then introduced me to one of the daughters who came from the Mamay Kuts house. She said, why don't you include my mother's house also? So we went there. And from there, they told us that, the Dempo family stayed at our house while their Casa Dempo was being built. So that's how Casa Dempo got included. Casa Dempo got included, and they told us they were restoring their family house, which was earlier a Dominican convent, believe it or not. So we went to Dempo Nivas and so on. So that's how the whole chain reaction started, and that's how we included 21 houses. In fact, one of the houses, Mangirish Pai Raikar's house, there were paintings on the walls. And somebody brought out a broom to clean the wall for us to take the pictures. And I said, why don't we include Lakshmi Vishnu Harwalkar, who makes brooms? So that's how her house got included also.
Thank you. And across both your books, again, migration is like a really, really important theme. A lot gets written about international migration, and but actually not a lot gets spoken about local migration. I know it's a really, really big deal for Goans to move from villages even to the city. Could you tell me a little bit about how your grandfather's story started? Because I know it's something that will be a very common story for a lot of Goans.
True. Yeah. I think basically there was a lack of opportunities and education in the villages. The education, especially for women in the villages, was only in Portuguese and only till the middle school. And I mean, it's a state, and like Heta said, there's so much of water and so many rivers that your whole life was in your village. You didn't really go very far. There was no transportation, etc., which was hard to understand now. So both my grandfathers left basically for education to study in British India, and then they went to work, one with the Post and Telegraphs, one with the railways. What happened is they always believed that you couldn't go back to Goa because there were no opportunities, there was no jobs. So they lived, when they retired, they lived in Pune. So I think for me, it was a strange sort of experience, because the Goans until today are leaving Goa for a variety of reasons, lack of opportunities, employment, etc. But to everybody else, it was such an interesting place. So to see the migration of Goans out of Goa and to see the migration of other people into Goa.
And do you have a lot of family members who also migrated in a similar manner?
I do. I have a few relatives in Goa comparatively. Most of the people have migrated. Traditionally, it was, within India, it was like Bombay, Pune, Nagpur, Belgaum for my family. Then out of the country, there were people, lots of Goans who went to East Africa. And from there to the UK, many to Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand. So But till today, a lot of people are migrating out of Goa. So but it's a few people who are sort of coming back. So I think I don't know what the numbers are, but the statistics of Goans leaving is still pretty high. I think also village life is very difficult, and like today what we were discussing, the whole thing of you know, development but lack of facilities and sewage systems and the urban planning that we talk about, which I think made villages difficult to live in because no electricity, no water and things like that, which still exists. But still there's so much of migration into Goa with development, and especially in the pandemic, everybody moved there. So I think to me, it's always the balance of, you know, people moving out, people moving in, and how the identity and the culture are changing.
Thanks. I was in Panjim at Varsha bookstall, and Mr. Vaman Bhati, who's been running that store since 1961, moved from a village called Narva, which is literally 14 kilometers away to the city of Panjim, and it's the biggest move of his life. And similarly, there's many families here who moved from smaller villages to Panjim because the economic opportunities were just more in a port city. Could you tell us about a few families from your book?
One is Alka Gaikar's story, when she never tires of saying this. She said, my mother's house is only 40 minutes away, but it changed my life. Those 40 minutes changed my entire life. And her daughters now are mothers themselves, and they say, Mama, please stop now talking about this all the time. But that's the impact, the kind of impact it had made to her. Because really her whole life changed. In her village, at her mother's, she didn't have to braid her hair or in a bun. Now this is very important to a Goan married woman, that as soon as she gets married, she's made to wear a sari, first of all. She has to bind her hair in a bun. And I've been told this repeatedly, and it's one of the grinding songs also, that this bun is like a circle. It's like a tight, you know, it's like a prison for me. So these small things, like, you know, today we don't think about these things, but these are the things that changed their lives. Marriage was one thing, migration for jobs was another. And to add to what Michelle was saying, I think, you know, it's very endearing to me at least to find that a 14-year-old girl living in Canada has never been to Goa, has never been to India, in fact, and she will still call herself a Goan, and she still knows what village she comes from, and she will still save some money and send it to save a lake or a pond or something in her village, though she's never been there. So that to me is the Gaikar point.
There's also a very significant family called the Mamay Kuts in your book. They also moved from a village and played a really, really huge role in shaping Panjim. Can you tell us a little about them?
I'll just show a picture. The Mamay Kuts were a very important family, actually. They were translators, they were traders. They were the ones, I think, speculation also a little bit on the side, because they used to go get the prices of things on the ships and then come back and manipulate the market. And in fact, the Mamay Kuts papers have filled something like 14 bullock carts when they closed up the house, and they sent all the Mamay Kuts papers to the Xavier Center of Historical Research. That's how important this family was. And one of the most interesting things about this family is that Ganesh is the most important festival for all Hindu Goans. In fact, even for Catholics, when we have a Ganesh in the neighborhood, we'll say Amcho Ganesh, our Ganesh. So even for a non-Hindu, he's our Ganesh. And they were banned from worshipping Ganesh during Ganpati, which must have been a really traumatic experience for them. So what this family did was, they drew an image on paper or on a peepal leaf, and they would worship that. And the flowers they would put in their own well in their own house. Now we got liberated in 1961. How many years is that? And still, till today, there is a paper Ganesh worshipped in this house, Mamay Kuts' house. And the other interesting thing is, only the elder, the karta of the family, knows where it is hidden, that image. You don't need to hide it now. Still, these traditions have continued.
And I think a lot of festivals actually don't belong to any religion, particularly now. They've across religion, they've become very syncretic. I know you've written a lot about them, and your book also has a lot of them. Could you tell us about a few?
I think they were originally indigenous, and they were to worship the land or the spirits, or so that you were safe, your fields were safe, your crop was safe. And I think as religions came and put their rituals, then those same festivals were sort of taken by each religion. So I think it started with the land and with Mother Earth, and then, whichever religion came, it sort of took them. And but there are so many festivals in Goa which you don't realize. Like every month
weekend
there's, I
there is
don't know,
one.
every week there's a festival, I think, which is the rich culture to related to the land, related to community, getting people together, the food, the music, that kind of thing. So I think they started as indigenous, then different religions have taken them over. So like before weddings, all this rose ceremony, which is similar to haldi, I think, in other religions. The same was like for your house, the bhumi puja, which you do, before a construction, which is, to the earth to make sure your house is safe. So in Catholic houses, you do the bhumi puja, but you take a little cross, a small gold cross, and you bless it and you bury it under the cross. So I mean, it is the same tradition, but it's across all religions. And I think you don't realize the amount of similarity in all the religions in Goa. Even the bride, I think they dress up, they have the bangle ceremony before.
All
The mama
Catholic
puts
brides
the,
will have a green bangle,
Yeah.
even though they are, in that
That white
bridal
dress.
gown.
So I think it's a lot of different places in India where even in the north, the mama puts the bangles for the bride. It's the same thing. And I would wonder, you see these girls in their white dresses, but with the green bangles and, So, I mean, there's so many syncretic traditions which I discovered because you live a very different life, and when you go to Goa, you realize the amount of traditions and the amount of history. So it was interesting to learn them for myself, and then I thought, let me record them because it was changing so fast.
I think the grinding stories also had a split in tradition at some point, and then there were the OVOs sung in Valpoi, and then the OVOs sung in the south. They have a similar background, but something happened when Konkani was banned. What happened there?
Actually, Konkani was not banned, but all the legal documents were to be in Portuguese. And that the Goans took as a ban on their own language. So with that, the songs that were sung at the grinding stone in Konkani, they went underground. And it's only recently that the Gaude Catholic community, they hid their song. The songs went underground, but they kept them alive. And in fact, even for their weddings, though they were not allowed to sing, they would call the Hindu neighbors to come and sing at the weddings in Konkani. So that is how this whole culture was kept alive. And the songs are also quite different. Like as I was saying, when you were married very young, your songs have emotions, sorrow, pathos, depression. The grinding stone becomes your best friend. There's nobody else you can confide in because you never know if you confide in mother-in-law or sister-in-law. If things don't go well for you, you've had it. She'll go and rat on you. So the thing is that you confided in that grinding stone. That grinding stone was taken as female and as your best friend. And in the Catholic tradition, the songs are a bit full of fun, merriment. There's a song that says, oh, don't Don't head for the bottle all the time. This bottle has a cork, it has a stopper. Why aren't you looking at that? My ring is sending you a message, can't you see the message? So that kind of songs are completely different, which in the Hindu community they would never, even if there's alcohol abuse, they will not talk about it. So that was the major difference that I found.
I actually like to go to a somewhat hot topic right now, which is also there in your book. I'd actually like to start with you telling me what you remember your village like it was when you used to visit in your vacations, because you have a whole chapter called Surely in the 70s and 80s. I know you studied village layouts from back in the day. I'd like both of you all to discuss that a little.
Sure. I think, I mean, to me, I used to come from Pune, and we used to come most summer vacations. And there was no electricity, there was no running water. We had piggy toilets, which I will leave you to read the details in my book. I don't want to make it uncomfortable. And it was very sort of slow life compared to living in a city. We took buses everywhere. There was no public transport. Some things haven't changed because we still don't have, we have very limited public transport even now. Taxis were unaffordable. That hasn't changed either, so we just took buses. It's just that we had a lot more time. I think now we are always sort of in a hurry and we have too many things to do. So we would come, we'd, eat fish. We looked forward to the tisriya, we looked forward to the mangoes. So it was really a village life, but for us it was like very, we were going back to the city. We knew that. So it was like, like a fun thing to do. And now when I see the same village, there's like, there's no space left. It's just like buildings, buildings, buildings. So for me, I think the contrast was so huge because I think all the houses faced the church. Right? That was the architecture or the geography. So like our house faces the church, there's a cross in the front, and there were maybe I don't know, like 5 or 6 houses from our house to the church. Now you can't see it. So it has changed so dramatically.
Were there some things that were very important as part of the Goan village?
Yeah, to me, what was most important is, I can actually draw a sort of hand picture. There's a hill at the back, there's flat land at the foot of the hill. So see the wisdom of the Goan ancients, like you'd never built on the hill. You allowed forest and woods and vegetation, primary, secondary, and tertiary vegetation to absorb the water from the rain. Allow the rivulets, allow the streams to fill up. You have tanks, you have lakes, you have ponds, and then you planted paddy at the back, at the bottom. So where do you live? You found a higher ground called the Murad or Morod. Higher ground, you built your houses. And as Michelle was saying, initially when Old Goa, when people moved to Panjim from Old Goa, what happened was they tried to face Old Goa, Bomb Jesus and the old cathedral and the churches there. Later, as they went further up, they started building their own churches on the model of the Old Goa churches, and they started building to face the church of the village. Also, the clustering of settlements helped the people spy on each other. That's another thing. So, in fact, yeah, that is a fact. So and there were a lot of them were related to one another. They all lived together and so on. And that's how it worked, for good or for bad.
Yeah, I think this sitting on the balcony and gossiping is a very important thing in Goa. And everyone sits on the balcony. You have to see what's happening in your neighbor's house. And as I've been talking about the book, and there's a lot of sort of newer people who move and they live in gated communities, or they live in houses and they build high walls. And the feedback I keep getting is, Michelle, we can't see what's going on. Like they are behind these high walls. And I think this whole thing of community is, you know, I mean, we look at it as being intrusive and spying, but they look at it as community. You know what's happening, whose dog is, you know, doing what, whose hen has flown into whose house, what has happened with the mango tree. And in the beginning, I was like, what's going on here? My neighbors would say, last night someone came late, they left late. Like, when did you come from Bombay? Which flight you took? And these sort of questions were sort of very sort of intrusive from my point of view. Now I've become like, oh, where did you go? Where have you come? So it is, but I think that the issue is if you live in a house in the village, to be part of the community, even if you don't sit in your balcony and gossip, it is, I think, people behind high gates, they feel that, you know, we're keeping the Goans out, we don't know what's happening. And now the same thing with this unplanned development, which is happening everywhere. And the other issue is they've started building this very high, like patra. As soon as there's a site, they put like a 10, 12 feet patra. So you don't know the trees being cut, you don't know the digging. And that is, again, this whole thing I heard people saying we have to talk about, we don't want the patra, we want to monitor the, so it comes from a place of concern, I think, and community. And I think that is what is endearing.
I also know there was all this planning that was going on back in the day, and I know Goa was one of the first states to introduce a regional development plan. And then in your book, you say they put a road through your house, and that's also common to you, and that's happened to a lot of people. What's happening with town planning today? And you have multiple chapters discussing that.
Yeah, both our houses are like that. We've got 2 plots with the road cutting through it. So if I have to park the car there, cross the road and get into the house.
Yeah, so I think the roads, I mean, in Goa, and I'm sure, I don't know about Bangalore, but it's not planned, definitely the villages. I think Pancham is more planned. There was no road. Again, when I went in the 70s and 80s, our house, there was no road. There were no compound walls. It was just like, you know, few crosses, few wells, and that was it. Then, of course, the road came, and it goes in my property, so I have like 2 plots. But it's still better. There are people who, like, the railway track is going through their house and things like that. And I think in this whole planning or lack of planning or whatever, development in terms, they don't look physically, they just look at some plan somewhere. They don't look at the number of trees. They don't look like, okay, if I move this by 6 inches and the road is like this, we'll save so many trees. They want a straight road, which also is causing different traffic-related problems because people are speeding. There have been a lot of accidents. Plus, I mean, just the number of trees that are being cut. And I think with planning, the thing is to give public transport instead of everybody having to have a car and a scooter and a car and a scooter, because there is no other way of going around. So I think that is the whole issue with the town planning, and I mean it's now at another level in terms of how the regional plan is not being implemented and being changed very fast. So.
You also worked in activism for 25 years in Goa. What's been your experience?
10 years in Bombay and close to 27 years in Goa. So planning always has problems. It's not like you can't please everyone all the time. There is no doubt about it. But Goa was known for its regional plan. 2001-2011 plan was pretty sound. And at that time, the government, though it was a BJP government, was listening to the voice of the people. Now, I'm afraid things are different. What has happened recently, I mean, there's a whole lot I can say about it. But what recently has happened between the 7th of March and the 14th of March, in just 1 week, 8 lakh square meters of land, of forest and farm, has been converted to settlement under the guise of making corrections. So that's the kind of rampant urbanization and rapid urbanization that's taking place, and they introduce amendments to the existing Town and Country Planning Act. So it's not like you can run to the court saying that this law has been violated, because they changed the law.
And I know a lot of these problems also come because Goa is the most urbanized state in the country. And I heard someone say at a talk recently that when everyone's running away from big cities and coming to Goa, they're actually coming to the most urbanized state in the world, in the country. But a lot of this is also happening without changing the zoning of any of these villages. What's that doing to a village like Shioli?
So I think that is the challenge, because people come to Goa for this, this beautiful place, the beaches, the fields, the hills, and like Heta said, there's the hill, there's the fields, the Kazan, the river, it's all the ecosystem. And you land in Goa, it's a beautiful place, everybody feels relaxed, or they sell you a beautiful brochure, but you don't realize there is no sewage system in a village. And with the amount of construction coming, with just septic tanks and soak pits, all our wells are poisoned. The water table is just depleted because you're just pouring concrete into the soil. And then, I was at a protest a couple of days ago where the people who've been living there have no water. The water hasn't come, it's May. There's like protests about the water, and there are just luxury developments coming with private swimming pools. So I think that sort of, you can almost, feel like these water wars, which you realize in an apocalyptic world, this is where we are headed. You can see it already happening in Seoli. And people don't realize, like, every time I sort of step out of my house, there's a water tanker, because these villas, there are a lot of rules on bore wells now after, like, it's been depleted so much. There are some villages are fighting about the bore wells because they have depleted the water table. So they go to the next village and then they bring water tankers. So you see water tankers, you see sewage tankers, and you see JCBs. That's all you see on the roads, because they're just digging and digging, and because of the lack of planning, there are all these very luxury villas that comes with the swimming pool, because that's an aspirational life for a lot of middle-class people. Or people sell your apartment in Bangalore, Bombay, Pune, Delhi, and you get this beautiful house. But I think people don't realize that there is no water. Like, so many people come after buying these luxury villas to me and say, Michelle, there's no water, there's no water. I'm like, and you're not going to get water. They are just going to get bore well water, because the permissions are, people have started protesting. And I have a whole chapter, it's tongue-in-cheek, called, how Asagaon became Gurgaon. But it's true. It is Asagaon, which is a village just next door to Seoli. Over the pandemic, it is just unrecognizable. And there is no water. There's just bore wells over there, and people have been protesting, and it's a whole nexus of the panchayat officials, the builders, the bore well owners, and things like that. And people have, right now, a lot of the villages are fighting against these mega projects, because, just entire cities or townships and things like that, which you see in Gurgaon, you see in Whitefield, you see in many places. They already exist in, like, Porvorim and Panjim. There are these huge projects. It's very convenient to live in, for people to live in. You have a nice apartment, but I think the overall effect on the ecosystem, especially in Goa, where it's so fragile, is what people are fighting. Just because the water, it's just, I think people in Bangalore will resonate because of whatever Bangalore is going through. And we're just like a few years behind Bangalore. And I think we need to learn from this, which is not happening. So that is the sad. And at this protest, people were saying, yes, you move to Goa, you live in one house, it's fine, but why do you need a swimming pool? Why do you need a swimming pool? So that is the irony.
Despite all of this, quite funnily, in one chapter of your book, you write all the different kinds of people sitting and hanging out together in Goa. There's a lot of funny combinations there. Could you tell us a little about that?
So I have a whole chapter called The Many Different Siolis and the Many Different Goas, because many people move to Goa, but you continue to live in your own bubble of, like-minded people. So you have artists, you have musicians, you have activists, you have environmentalists. Up to me, and you have hippies, you have, many hippies who've lived there for a long time. And I don't know how much the interaction is, and I'm always people watching and listening. And I think yesterday on the panel, she said, as a writer, the way of processing your sort of observations is to write. So I think the people who move to Goa and who sort of are interested in community, are interested in history, are interested in heritage, are interested in helping the state, as opposed to people who are just there for the good life. And I think that is always many people told me, Michelle, you become Goan. I'm not becoming Goan. I'm staying in my little bubble. I don't want to, get into this. So it's just interesting to me, because before Goa was a very laid back place. And like I said, Goans left because of lack of opportunities. Now it's very sweet to see people with young children moving to Goa, because there are schools, and also the pandemic allowed me and many people to live in Goa but not work in Goa. So I can live in Goa but earn from different places, and so there's a whole lot of younger people like you who moved in the gig workers and things like that. And I mean, I always like to understand what they know about Goa and the Goan identity. And many people are like, they live in their bubble of, whatever the cool life they've moved for. And they have no idea of what is going on in Goa with the issues and things like that. And I think that I that was another motivation for writing the book. It's like, you need to know this is what Goa is about. So these protests now, you do see people from different places coming, but it's still the people from the village who lived there the longest who are because they know the law, it's very complicated, they know the processes to get into, they know the language. But a lot of other people have been coming to support, because there are a lot of people moved for an eco-conscious lifestyle, slow living, those kinds of things, who are behind the cause. But ultimately, it's the people from the village who are leading it.
And in a place like Goa, I find that the percentage of people who are invested in the future of the village and know their laws and are very actively involved in activism is much higher than where I come from in Bangalore. Would you all find that to be true?
Yeah, I think so.
I think this is why this stereotype of, it's Susega, then it's laid back, is very interesting, because the average just the guy over there is just so active in terms of the environment, in terms of culture, in terms of laws, in terms of getting RTIs.
Planning, regional plan, they know each village in Goa of the 155 village panchayats, you will find at least one person who knows the law inside out, who knows the regional plan inside out, all the violations, everything about it. He may or may not have a following in his village, but at least he knows it. So, which is heartening to see, I think.
The thing is that what happened is they felt it was lonely, and, just the money of building mafias and politicians and things like that, they couldn't fight it. Now they feel that newer people are coming, there is support and things like that. So, but the person who actually knows it will be somebody who's lived there his whole life.
I have time for one last question. And I think from what I see, villages in Goa are about the size of localities in Bangalore. But I think as we rapidly urbanized, we lost a lot of our folklore. But Goans still hold on to them very tightly, and it's actually part of daily life. and both your books actually document a lot of them. I'd love to hear your favorite folklore and stories from these villages. I know Shioli has a lot of them as well.
So, yeah, I have one whole chapter on finding Seoli legends and stories, because with legends and with you don't know what is true, what is myth, how many years it was made up, but everybody has this. And in Seoli, the most important landmark is St. Anthony's Church. And it's the only place in the world where St. Anthony is holding a snake in his hand. And the story is that, I think there are two parts to the story. One is that Portuguese merchants were coming with the statue of St. Anthony, and they were sort of being tossed around, in the sea. There was a storm, and they didn't think they'd ever see land. And they said, wherever we find land, we will build a church to St. Anthony with this statue. The other legend is that Seoli were looking to build a church because the original church had, fallen down, and they needed a new church in the same place, but they didn't have the resources. And a third one is that they were building this church, and every night when they were building the church, the next morning the construction was all destroyed. And this was a legend that I was told by my father and grandfather, that every morning they would wake up, and whatever work they'd done the previous day, it had been taken down. So then one day one night, the priest and the workers, they put a statue of St. Anthony, and the next morning they found him with the snake in his hand. So, and then of course the construction went, and we have this big, beautiful church. So that is just one legend, but there are, I don't know how many, and I dug up a lot, but there's still a lot more. There's Saint Jean in Seoli, which is special. There's a traditional boat parade that comes in. There is the Zagor, which, the Hindu community and the Catholic community celebrate together. And there are many more, but I'll leave you to read about them in my book.
What about you, Heta?
Let me, in the old days, they say that dacoits would come with appointments. Okay? So if this I believe is true elsewhere also, but here they would come by appointment, and you had to put everything at the front doorstep, whatever you want to surrender to them. And they would come, and they would not hurt anybody. That was the idea of giving them the appointment. Of course, if they came without an appointment, you had every right to shoot at them. So this is one such house, the Antau house. He said that if they used to hide in this courtyard all the ornaments, this one here. And so most of their wealth was in land, they said. So what ornaments did they have? But whatever little they had in the house, they would hide in this courtyard, and they would put a mirror over these ornaments because they themselves might forget where the ornaments were. So that is one story that I like a lot from this book. And the other story is of the Ravindra house. Okay, this one. Now, when we photographed this house, we were told not to step on the second step of the entrance. The reason being that when the dacoits came on horseback to this house, they were faced in the middle of the night with a lady dressed in a beautiful sari, 9-yard sari, kumkum or vermilion on her forehead, fully ornamented, gold ornaments, and she was sitting on the second step. So the dacoits realized that this was none other than the goddess Shanta Durga, and they left the house alone. So in honor of this legend, even today, nobody steps on that second step of the front entrance.
That's also a lot of dacoitry in Goa.
They were. Some of them are still there in government.
We'll have to open up the floor for questions now. But before we end, both of you all quote two very great Goan literary figures in your book. You have Manohar Desai and you have Ravindra Ker in your book. I'd like a quick introduction from you all and read out a passage from both those passages.
Manohar Desai is a great poet, artist, freedom fighter, translator, writer. I think recently there was a celebration for his centenary, which was in the Goa University, all his writings, his poetry. So it's in this chapter called What's So Special About Goans Anyway? And I quote him he wrote in Goa Today, which was a popular magazine, and this is taken from his guest column in the May 1984 Goa Today on being Goan. Nothing is simpler than being a Goan. For God in his infinite sagacity has divided the world into two continents, Goa and the rest of the world, and the whole of humanity into two distinct races, Goans and non-Goans.
Thank you for that, Michelle. I'm going to read from Ravindra Ker, who's a Konkani writer and a freedom fighter, a Gandhian. And this is a Hindu gentleman brought up in Goa who was influenced by the Bible. He says, one day I was going through the Christian hymn in the ashram Bhajnawali when I surveyed the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died. I was suddenly struck by the utter hollowness of my own life. What kind of life am I leading? Eat, drink, sleep, and wake. Beyond this, what else does my life entail? There's not a shred of anything in it which would inspire complete surrender to a grand vision. And I think this has touched a chord in me.
Thank you. We'll now open up for questions. I think a mic will be passed on to you if you have a question.
Thank you, Harihara, Heta, and Michelle. I think this is what we needed in the morning today. So many lovely stories and stories of the past and some hope for the future. And when you were talking about the treasure story, I was also reminded of what I read in Michelle's book about the gold coins being hidden in the search for that. But in your book, you mentioned in a couple of places, couple of times about the Goa for Goans kind of attempt that came from the people, firstly from the communist groups, and then the second one which didn't work out. Do you think there's any future in that sort of a movement, considering that there's quite a bit of rampant migration, or how do you deal with, loss of culture is something that we cannot, I don't think we can do anything about it, but what seems to be the solution? Or
I don't think there's any solution, and I don't think the bill was passed for, obvious reasons, but it was just to illustrate the sentimentality. And it's just because there's this belief that people are coming and encroaching on the land. And there are these signs, like literally, I have a photo somewhere of this outsiders. This term outsiders is used in, normal conversation. And there was a big banner saying, "Save Goa, outsiders not allowed." And I was like, it's against whatever we believe in terms of migration, in terms of inclusion. But it was some big developer, designer that was building luxury villas, cutting into the hill. And so it was, the sentiment was put onto that. And then people fought and they stopped it. But that is the perception. Obviously, there are Goan builders doing the same thing as well. But the feeling is, and Goan politicians, selling Goa. But that is just the public sentiment because of the great pride in the land. So it is difficult to sort of understand, but that's the emotion. I understand it's happening in...
Is it? I think xenophobia is part of our, DNA, anywhere you go. When I first came to Saligaon, when I was looking at the house, my friend Daniel D'Souza said, no, we should meet the neighbors because we are going to be living with them forever and so on. So we went to the next door house, and this lady was sitting on an armchair in the balcony, and we walked up, and he said, we are planning to buy this house next door. And so she said, what's your name? And I said, Heta Pandit. She said, we don't want any Hindus in our neighborhood. So that was a bit of a shocker to me at that time. I understand where it came from. And Daniel said, no, 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 she's not a Hindu, she's a Parsi from Bombay. She said, oh, then that's different because my brother used to work for Parsis in Bombay.
I'd like to add to that, a lot of our friends who work in the activism space are not against development. They're just fighting a lot for planned development. I'm doing a plug-in here, follow Goa Bachao Abhiyan on Instagram. What they're doing is going from village to village and enlightening villagers about smart planning, and they're doing a pretty good job at that. Go support them, yay.
I just wanted to check how the economy has changed for the locals in Goa with, so many people coming in and a lot of money coming into Goa. Is it that they've been able to capitalize more on people coming in and with the tourism, or has it become more expensive for the locals because everything else has shot up now? So,
Unfortunately, the latter. I was just saying, in villages like Seoli and Asagaon, you pay as much money, to drink a cup of coffee like in Bombay or in Delhi. I mean, the prices in restaurants are just, and people believe that they're not for them. They can't afford them. So the thing is that this whole thing about tourism and development is complicated because it does bring money, but the environmental costs. From my understanding, most of the remittances for Goans still come from expat Goans. It's remittances that contribute. So there isn't that much of jobs, and a lot of people who also do the work are also from different places. Some of the Goans still own the property, so you still, you get rental income, and that is beneficial. But what happened with the whole pandemic again and the whole Airbnb thing, what happened is everybody who owned second homes, they managed to put them onto Airbnb and get money. So again, there was resentment there because there was like, the outsiders are coming, they're bringing COVID, they're renting and this and that. So it is not really ideal, and the Goans feel that we don't want to pay the price. We don't want this money. We don't want this tourism. We don't want this type of development. So, because it's like the number of people who've come, and then the traffic and all these kinds of issues which you don't realize. And then again, like scooters, people don't know how to ride scooters. People don't know how to drive cars. You are like walking your dog. You're going to work. You're going to school, and you're sort of, and so many accidents, like many neighbors have said, people have just been drinking the whole night. The next morning they're driving. You are going on your scooter to work, and there've been accidents. So that's why there's a lot of, because of this whole party thing. We'll go to Goa, we'll just drink till we pass out, and that is the perception. Whereas the Goans are, not in this partying gang at all. They're living like pretty conservative, traditional lives. So that is also the whole stereotype, which is sort of dichotomous in like what is Goa and Goans and the perception for everybody else.
Sorry, we actually don't have time for another question. We have to wrap up, but sorry, it's almost 12. Sorry, okay, go ahead. Quickly, please. Yeah.
Okay, just curious if a hybrid language is developed because of a mixture of Marathi, Konkani, Portuguese. Has a hybrid language developed in Goa?
Actually, what we call, there's an invisible line in the old conquests and the new conquests with Portuguese. On the western villages and towns, they spoke predominantly Portuguese and English later in the 1860s for jobs, obviously. But in the eastern part, the Ponda, Valpoi, Savoy Vere, that side, those villages, they spoke a language which was a mix of Marathi and Konkani, which they still do. So if you pick up grinding stories or grinding stories retold, you will see the original is in a Marathi Konkani dialect, which they still speak. But if you go to these villages, if you speak Marathi, you don't know Konkani, you'll get by. Sorry?
Not anymore, but there's a revival now with Fundacao Orient. They have started teaching Portuguese in schools and at the university and in colleges as a language. I mean, like French and, German and things.
But it's mostly taken up by people who want their children to go abroad, get Portuguese passports, go to Europe through Portugal and so on. Thank you for the question. Thank you for a lovely session. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We're
Thanks,
looking forward to the
IHS.
next session.